Moed Simcha Rabotai. We are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Pesachim. We are up to Perek Zayin, Mishnah Aleph. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilun Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev, and Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov, Meruchatam beGan Eden. Amen. The Torah states in Sefer Shemot, chapter 12, Pasuk 9, you shall not eat the Pesach partially roasted or cooked in water, only roasted over a fire, which teaches that the meat of the Pesach offering must be roasted over fire and not cooked in any other way. The Mishnah discusses how it was roasted. Ketzad sulin et Pesach. How do we roast the Pesach? Mivi'in shaput shel rimon. We bring a spit made of pomegranate wood, which does not give off moisture. And the commentators explain, since a Pesach must be fire roasted, we must ensure that it is not roasted with any water, which would be considered cooking. Now, most types of wood give off some moisture when heated, and if used as a spit, the moisture might mix with the Pesach and cause part of it to be cooked and not roasted. Therefore, they use pomegranate wood, which does not give off any moisture. And as we will learn in the next Mishnah, a wooden spit must be used, not a metal one. And the Mishnah continues, we push it completely through the body of the animal from its mouth to the opening in its back. He then puts its legs and intestines, which were removed from the animal after it was slaughtered, inside the cavity of its body, so that they will be roasted along with the animal. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Now, just to give the background, the legs were cut off at the knees. The intestines had been removed earlier to be cleaned from waste matter, like we learned earlier in chapter 6, Mishnah 1. Rabbi Akiva Omer, but Rabbi Akiva says regarding the procedure, Kemin bishul uzeh, this is also like cooking, meaning if the legs and intestines are placed inside the animal, it appears as though they are being cooked inside a pot and not roasted directly over the fire. Ela tolin chutza la lo. Rather, we hang the legs and intestines directly on the spit outside the animal so that they face the fire. And that is the end of Mishnah Aleph. Mishnah Bet now continues, and solin et Pesach lo al shapud velo al askela. We may not roast the Pesach on a metal spit or on a metal grill, because the meat will be roasted by the heat of the metal and not directly by the fire. And the commentators explain, not only must the Pesach be roasted, but it must be tzli esh, roasted over fire, and not roasted by any other means. Since metal, unlike wood, conducts heat, if a metal spit or tray is used, the meat will be roasted by the heat of the metal and not directly by the fire. Now, before we continue the Mishnah, the Rav does point out, based off the Gemara on page 75a, that the Mishnah is missing the following statement, which must be inserted. We will say the statement outside, because without this statement, the commentators explain, the next statement of Rabbi Tzadok that follows would contradict the law that we just stated, that a grill may not be used, and the Mishnah never cites an incident to contradict the ruling, only to support one. So the commentators fill in the following. However, one may place the wooden spit that holds the Pesach on a grill that has large gaps between its rods, because the gaps allow the meat to be roasted directly by the fire. Now, one may use a grill made of parallel metal rods with large gaps between the rods. He may place the ends of the spit on the rods of the grill so that the meat rests in a gap between the rods and does not touch the metal. As Rashi explains on page 75a, whoever can see it in the illustrated Mishnayot will have clarity visually what the Mishnah is referring to. The Mishnah continues, Amar Rabbi Tzadok, as Rabbi Tzadok said, Maaseh beRabban Gamliel shamar litavi avdo. It once happened that Rabban Gamliel said to Tavi, his slave, Tze utzle lanu et Pesach al askela. Go out and roast the Pesach for us on a grill that has large gaps between its rods, because again, like we said, the meat rests in the gaps between the rods and does not touch the metal. Therefore, it will not be cooked by the heat of the metal. Now, the spit with the Pesach must be suspended inside an earthenware oven, and a fire was kindled beneath it on the oven floor, like the Rambam writes in Ilchot Korban Pesach, chapter 8, Halakha 10, and the background being that ovens in the times of Mishnah were usually made of earthenware. Now, the Mishnah discusses some laws that apply while it's roasting. Naga b'chaso shel tanur, if the meat touched the hot earthenware wall of the oven, yiklof et mikomo, he must peel off the place on the meat that touched the oven, because that meat was roasted by the heat of the earthenware and not directly by the fire. And the Rav explains he must remove the top layer of the part that actually touched the oven wall. The piece that is removed may not be eaten. Now, peeling in this context means to slice off the thinnest layer possible from the surface of the meat that touched the wall. Nataf meratbo ala cheres v'chazar alav. If some juice from the Pesach dripped onto the hot earthenware and then splattered back and it was absorbed by the meat, it's not enough to just peel the spot. Rather, yitolet mikomo, he must remove from the meat the place that absorbed the juice. Now, removal in this context means to cut off a piece, ke'ovi etzba, like the thickness of a finger. Since that juice touched the earthenware and became cooked by its heat, it may not be eaten. Since it was then reabsorbed by the meat may not be eaten. Therefore, he must remove the whole section of meat in which it was absorbed. The Rav explains here, it's not enough to simply peel off a layer. The hot juice gets more deeply absorbed into the meat. He must therefore cut out the meat as far down as the hot juice penetrates, which, like we said, is ovi etzba, a piece of thickness of a finger. Nataf merotbo ala solet, if juice from the Pesach dripped onto hot flour that was in the oven, ikmot et mekomo, he must remove a handful of flour from the place that the juice touched. The juice was cooked by the heat of the flour and may not be eaten, and therefore the flour in which the juice is absorbed also becomes forbidden and must be removed. Now here we assume that the forbidden juice penetrated a handful of flour, which is a larger amount than the thickness of a finger that is removed in the previous case. Now the meat and flour that is removed in these cases must be burned in keeping with the laws that apply to offerings that become invalid. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Everybody shave Moed Sameach. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.